All right, you've made it to the last video of this unit. So our last day, we're going to talk about multiplying complex numbers together, which you've done a little bit of. We're going to talk about more about conjugates and dividing complex numbers. So remember, your complex numbers involve your I, your imaginary unit. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the additive inverse. The additive inverse is what you can add to a term in order for it to equal 0. So in other words, I would say that 5 plus what would give me 0. All right, so what could you put in that place so that this value gave you 0 as a result when you added 5? Well, it would have to be negative 5, because 5 plus a negative 5 is equal to 0. So the additive inverse of positive 5 is negative 5. All right, let's talk about 4i. So if I took 4i and I wanted to add something to it to make it cancel out so that I got 0, it would just have to be negative 4i. So if I took 4i and I added to it a negative 4i, that would equal 0. So the additive inverse of positive 4i is negative 4i. You can also take into consideration when you have binomials, so negative 3 minus 7i. So we would say, all right, what could we add to negative 3 minus 7i in order to make it cancel out? Remember, this is the additive inverse, so you're thinking opposite. So what we would take to this and add to it in order to get to 0, we would have to add a positive 3 and a positive 7i. So 3 plus 7i would be the additive inverse of negative 3 minus 7i. All right, so it's just what you add to the value in order to make it equal to 0. All right, so we're going to talk about a little review. This is a little review from 4.4 when we were talking about i's and adding terms together. Remember, you treat I like a variable, so you follow your same rules for that. We're going to simplify and leave our answer in a plus bi form. This is going to be important for you to remember, that you leave it in that correct form, because on the Regents exam, they're going to take off for it if it's not in the correct form. So for number 2, when you're adding these two binomials together, what you're looking at is you're combining like terms. So anytime you're adding your imaginary numbers and your real numbers together, just think combining like terms. So think combine like terms, CLT. All right, so if I look at my real values are 2 and 4, so I can add those together. That's going to give me 6. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add the imaginary units together. So I have a positive 4 and a negative 1i. So that together is going to give me a 3i. So this ends up being 6 plus 3i. And again, you want to make sure it's in the correct form, which is your a plus bi form. That imaginary unit has to come second. Now, at number 3, you have to be careful because you have this negative here. So think about distributing that negative. So if I wanted to drop my parentheses, I could say 12 plus 5i, distribute the negative, negative 2 plus I. From here, I can combine my like terms. So I have a positive 12, negative 2, that's going to give me a 10. And then our imaginary unit, 5i and positive I, that's going to give me a positive 6i. So we have 10 plus 6i is going to be the result when we subtract those two together. All right, a little bit more review here. Okay, numbers 4 and 5. Now remember, we're talking about the imaginary unit. When you're simplifying negative square roots, you want to simplify those first before you go ahead and add or subtract anything. So looking at this, remember from 4.4, we talked about the fact that the square root of negative 1 now has a value, and it is I. So this becomes the binomial 2 plus I. And in my second binomial, remember we talked about the square root of negative 16 would be 4i. So we have 2 plus I plus negative 3 plus 4i. So now you can go ahead and combine your like terms. So we've got negative 1 plus 5i. So the key to those is to make sure that when you're in that first step that you're going to simplify first. Okay? All right. Take a look at number 5 now. You have 1, 2, 3, 4 I terms there. So in this case, you want to simplify all of your i's first. So a little bit of review here. When you simplify your i's, remember you're going to divide by 4. So I probably should write my wheel of I, because I'm going to need that. So remember you got 0, 1, 2, 3 on the outside. We have 1, I, negative 1, and negative I. Alright, so when we simplify each one of these, remember every time you simplify an I term, it's going to simplify down to 1I, negative 1, or negative I. So you're going to start by dividing 4 into 13. Alright, 4 goes into 13 3 times, so that's 12. I get a remainder of 1. So if you think back to when we talked about when we first started talking about the imaginary unit, we said that it didn't matter how many times 4 divided into the number, it was the remainder that was important. So I to the 13th is the same thing as I to the 1st, which looking at our wheel of I, this is equal to I. Now as I go through and simplify each one, every single one of those is going to result in 1I, negative 1, or negative I. So I'm going to go ahead and do 4 into 35. Okay, so 4 is going to go into 35. Oh. Alright, so 4 is going to go into 35 8 times, so that's going to give me 32, so that's going to give me a remainder of 3. So I to the 35th is the same thing as I to the 3rd, which when looking at my wheel of I is equal to negative I. So this is going to now be negative 8 times negative I. Alright, so take a minute and go ahead and simplify I to the 20th and I to the 17th. Alright, when you simplified I to the 20th, you should have gotten 1, because there's no remainder there. And then I to the 17th simplifies down to just I. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a look at each one of those. So I have, this is an I, then this becomes a positive 8I when I multiply those two together, minus 11 plus 20I. So if you'll notice, we have some I terms in there, and we have a constant value. So that constant value of negative 11, that's your real number, that's going to come first in your A plus BI form. Remember we said that was going to be important to make sure you kept everything in the correct form. So this is going to be negative 11, and then you're going to combine each one of your I terms. So all together we've got 1 plus 8 is 9, plus another 20 is going to give us 29I. So the answer to all of that we started with is negative 11 plus 29I. As we take a look at 6, 7, and 8, one of the things that I want you to keep in mind is that when you're multiplying your i's together, that you add your exponents. So your I value is your base. So when you multiply those together, you want to make sure that that exponent of 1 that you're not seeing up here, so these really have exponents of 1, that you're adding those together. So when I multiply negative 2I and 5I, I end up with negative 10, because it's negative 2 times 5, I squared. Now thinking back to 4.4, I told you that I squared was equal to negative 1, and that was going to be important for you to remember because we use it a lot. So I can now replace this I squared with a negative 1. So now if I multiply negative 10 times negative 1, I just end up with an answer of positive 10. So anytime you see where you have an I squared, you can always replace it with negative 1. Now, in number 7, we're multiplying all 3 of those together. So start with your coefficient values, the 5, the 6, the negative 12. You multiply all those together, you're going to end up with negative 360. And then you have 3 i's that you're multiplying there, so that's going to become I to the 3rd. All right, thinking to your wheel of I to the 3rd is equal to negative I. So this is going to be negative 360 times negative I. And when I multiply those two together, I'm going to end up with a positive 360I. All right, I want you to try number 8 on your own. One thing I want you to keep in mind is if something is squared, it's multiplied by itself. All right, go ahead and try number 8. Okay, I'm hoping that you all ended up with negative 9 for your answer there. Keep in mind that it's 3I times 3I. So you should have ended up with 9i squared, and then replace that I squared with a negative 1, multiplied one more time to give you a final answer of negative 9. All right. Conjugates. So there's a little shortcut that you can take with conjugates, and some of you might remember from 4.4, I pointed that out to you. And as you've been working in class, I also pointed out when you multiply your conjugates, there's a little shortcut. When you multiply conjugates together and you double distribute or your FOIL or you use your box method, what the one thing that you will notice that consistently happens is that your middle terms always cancel out. So the only thing that when you're multiplying conjugates that you really need to multiply together is the first terms and the last terms. So this is going to end up giving me 16 minus 9i squared. Well, I'm pretty sure we just saw 9i squared in the previous problem, and I squared is equal to negative 1. So this is 16 minus 9 times negative 1. So this ends up being 16 plus 9. So you end up with a value of 25. So this comes in handy when you have a complex number in your denominator. Notice that if you multiply by the conjugate, you end up with an integer value in the end. So that works out nice when you're trying to simplify your fractions. Now in number 10, what we want to do first is we want to take care of that negative 8 inside the radical. So what I want to do first is I want to simplify that. So what I'm going to do is off to the side here, I'm going to do square root of negative 8. So that's the square root of negative 4 times 2. And negative 4, if I take the square root of that, is going to be 2i. So I'm going to rewrite these binomials as negative 1 plus 2i radical 2 and 1 minus 2i radical 2. Alright, so that when I multiply this out, I'm not worried about negative radicals there. I've already taken care of that. So we have, oh, I forgot my negative there. Any of you guys catch that? Negative 1. Nice job for those of you that did. Alright, so I'm going to multiply negative 1 times negative 1. That's going to give me a positive 1. And negative 1 times negative 2i radical 2. That's going to end up being a positive 2i radical 2. And then I'm going to do minus 2i radical 2. So I know that I'm doing this right because these are conjugates. My middle terms are going to end up canceling. Now, be very careful with this last one here. When you multiply this last one, it's going to be minus 4i squared times the square root of 4, because I'm multiplying radical 2 times radical 2. Alright, let's get rid of these middle terms. We don't need those. So now we have 1 minus 4. I'm going to replace my I squared with a negative 1, and I'm going to replace the square root of 4 with 2. So I need to multiply all of those together. So this ends up being 1 plus 8, which is going to give me a final value of 9. Alright, so that worked out nicely. I mean, at the beginning, you guys probably had no idea that you're going to end up with a nice answer like 9 by the time you got done. Okay, so just one of the big things is making sure that you're very careful about how you multiply. Take your time. Make sure you're showing every step, not skipping anything in between. Alright, I want you to try 11 and 12 on your own. So 11, I'll get you started. Notice it's squared. So you're going to multiply 2 plus 7i times 2 plus 7i. So remember to double distribute. Those are not conjugates. You can't take that shortcut. You got to multiply out the whole thing. All right, and when you're ready, you can join me again and we can check our answers. All right, I am hoping that you multiplied everything very carefully, replaced your I squareds with negative 1s, very carefully combined like terms, ended up with negative 45 plus 28i for number 11, and 9 plus 58i for number 12. Okay, if you didn't come up with those answers, I did everything step by step, so you can go ahead, follow my work, and see if you can catch your mistake. All right, taking a look at number 13. 13, the key to this one is making sure that you simplify everything first and then go through and combine your like terms. So if I have the quantity 5 minus 2i squared, I want to make sure that I write that out twice and multiply it out. So So that's 5 minus 2i times 5 minus 2i. 6i to the 101st. So if I simplify I to the 101st, that's just going to simplify down to I. So if you don't believe me, go ahead, divide it by 4, see what happens. Okay, and this next one here, I'm going to distribute that negative 4, so this is going to be negative 8 minus 12. And while I'm at it, I'm going to take care of this I to the 10th. That's going to simplify down to I squared. Alright, so to kind of recap that a little bit, I squared the 5 minus 2i, so 5 minus 2i times 5 minus 2i. I simplified I to the 101st, that just simplifies down to I. And I distributed the negative 4, and at the same time, I took care of the I to the 10th, which really simplifies down to I squared. Alright, let's do a little more simplifying here. I'm going to multiply out this 5 minus 2i here. So this is going to give me 25 minus 10i minus 10i plus 4i squared. And we have a 6i here minus 8. Now, remember what I squared is equal to? I squared is equal to negative 1. So, since I squared is equal to negative 1, this right here, this negative 12i squared is really going to turn into a positive 12. Okay, let's clean up some more here. We have another I squared here. So what I'm going to do first, though, before I take care of that I squared, I'm going to take care, I have a 25 here. I have a negative 8 and a positive 12 over there. Now, if I take care of this I squared now, remember this is equal to negative 1. And since that's equal to negative 1, that's really negative 4. So that's another like term that I can combine there. So I have 25 minus 24 minus 8 plus 12 should go ahead and give me 25. And if I go ahead and look at my I terms, I have negative 10i, another negative 10i, and a positive 6i. So that should give me negative 14i when I combine all those. Okay, so that was just a matter of simplifying every little thing along the way, multiplying out everything carefully, replacing my I squareds with negative 1s. Alright, let's talk about when you have I in the denominator. So we've talked about what you do if you have a square root in the denominator, and the concept is a lot the same. If you have an I in the denominator, you're going to multiply the numerator and the denominator by I. So what I want to do is I want to take and distribute the I to the 4 plus I. So that's going to give me 4i plus I squared. And in the denominator, it gives me an I squared. Well, the nice thing about this is that, remember, I squared is equal to negative 1. So this is a negative 1, and this is a negative 1. So this is now 4i minus 1 all over negative 1. And we want to make sure that we put everything in the correct form, such as a plus bi form. Now you can have a negative in the numerator or the denominator, it doesn't matter. I'm going to move this up to the numerator and I'm going to distribute it. So this is now going to become negative 4i plus 1. Keep in mind a plus bi form, so this really should be read 1 minus 4i in order for it to be in the correct form. Now, if this was on a quiz and you put 4i minus 1 over negative 1, you would get it right. I wouldn't take off points for that. Alright, last one, 15 here. Now, you don't have to multiply by 4i. You can. You'll just have to reduce in the end. But really all you have to multiply by is the I, because that's really what you're looking to get rid of. So if I distribute that in the numerator, I get negative 2i minus 3i squared all over 4i squared. So go ahead and replace those I squareds with negative 1s. And in the numerator we have negative 2i plus 3, make sure you watch your signs when you're doing this, over negative 4. Okay, and making sure that it is a plus bi form, it should read 3 minus 2i all over negative 4. So that's your answer for that one. Okay, last two. Now keep in mind, we had just talked about conjugates, and this is where your conjugate's going to come into play. So if I want to get rid of the imaginary unit in the denominator, I'm going to multiply by the conjugate. So the conjugate of 4 plus 3i, good, 4 minus 3i. Okay, so in the numerator there, you're going to distribute. So you're going to get 20 minus 15i. And remember that little shortcut I told you about conjugates? That's going to come in handy here. It's going to save you a little bit of writing, a little bit of time. So multiply the first terms, which is going to give you 16. And then this is going to be minus 9i squared. Don't forget that I squared is equal to negative 1. So in the denominator there, you really have 16 plus 9. Okay, because you got that negative 9 times the negative 1. So this is going to be 20 minus 15i. And then in the denominator, you're going to get 25. So one of the things that you want to keep in mind is sometimes you can do a little reducing at the end. And in this case, we can. 20, 15, and 25 all reduced by what? 5. Good. So this is going to turn to a 5. This is going to a 4. This is going to a 3. So our final answer should read 4 minus 3i all over 5. All right? Last one. I'm going to give you the conjugate, and then I'm going to want you to try it on your own and see if you can come up with the right answer. So you're going to multiply top and bottom by 2 minus I. Don't forget that you are double distributing, foiling, use your box method, whatever you need to do to multiply those binomials in your numerators there. Okay, how'd you do on 17, that last one there? That was a little tricky. You really had to watch your signs, especially when we got to the denominator here, because that really was 4 plus 1. So you had to make sure that you watched out for that. And then when you got to the end, everything reduced by 5. So after you reduce everything by 5, you end up with negative 1 minus I. Alright, so you're going to come into class. You're going to work on your 4.6, which is your last problem set questions. We're going to do 2 days of review and then your test. So if you need to, rewatch any of the videos. Do a little review of your problem set questions, work on your review packets, work on your problem set questions, and if you have any questions in class, make sure you are asking. All right, have a great night, have a great day, have a great morning, whatever time you're watching this video. See you guys in class.